Thanks, everyone. We're just waiting for everybody to jump in from the wait room. We'll get started in a short minute. Okay, I might get started. So hello and welcome. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands from which we all respectively meet and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and all Indigenous peoples from across the region. We do recognise the enduring connection that First Nations people have to land, waters and culture, and that connection that continues unbroken through time. So while we do connect here today in a virtual forum across some amazing distances and even across time, because we are recording, it's important to acknowledge the usefulness of this online work, but also remember how important it is now more than ever to disconnect from the virtual world and take time to reconnect with country. And that's something that we can really learn from First Nations people, from the deep reciprocal relationships that they hold with place and community. So I'd personally like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the unceded lands that I work and live on, and I have the honour of ongoing care for country. So a very warm welcome to everybody who joins us today for the 2025 ACS and SDSN Australia, New Zealand and Pacific Regional Forum, Putting Education for the SDGs into Practice for Higher Education. My name's Rhiannon Boyd, I'm the CEO of ACS, and I'm delighted to be co-hosting this series along with Tal Keston, who's the Network Manager for SDSN Australia, New Zealand and Pacific. So this is actually the third regional forum that we've co-hosted together, and it builds on our long-standing collaboration through the Accelerating SDG initiative. So we launched that back in 2019. And through this initiative, ACS and SDSN have been working together to support higher education sector to embed the SDGs into strategy, into curriculum and into practice. In case you're wondering, all of the resources through this initiative, including past forum recordings, are available on the SDSN website and through the ACS member portal video archive as well. But for 2025, we are really focusing in on SDG 4.7, which calls on learners to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. So this is a really ambitious target and one that challenges the higher education sector to really think beyond content and to look at how we equip students with the capabilities, the mindsets, and the critical thinking required to tackle some really complex global issues. So this forum series is about putting that goal into practice, and we'll be showcasing how institutions are embedding education for sustainable development across curriculum, pedagogy, leadership and culture, as well as supporting others to accelerate and deepen their work in this space. So across 4 sessions that will take place over the next 2 weeks, we'll be hearing from senior leaders, educators and sustainability practitioners from across the region. We'll be having high-level discussions that examine the strategic importance and the broader policy context of education for sustainable development, but we'll also be looking at practical real-world approaches that are mainstreaming it within our institution. So these will touch on areas such as planetary health, green skills, systems thinking, and social impact, as well as providing, hopefully, inspiration and actionable ideas. So whether you are just beginning on this journey, we hope that these sessions offer inspiration and new perspectives, as well as practical tools that you can take back to your work. Now, before I introduce our moderator for today, some quick housekeeping notes for everyone. Today's session is just 1 hour, and that time will go through really quickly because we have some amazing speakers. There will be time for questions towards the end of the session. So to make sure we don't miss your questions, please use the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It looks like 2 speech bubbles with Q&A underneath. Just click on that, type your question and hit send. And you can submit your questions at any time, and we'll try to get through as many of them as time allows. So on that note, I am going to pass over to for our moderator for today's session. I'm delighted to introduce Professor John Thwaites. John is the chair of SDSN Australia, New Zealand and Pacific, as well as the Global SDSN Association. He also chairs the Monash Sustainable Development Institute and the Climate Works Centre. So John's been a real driving force in advancing the SDGs across our region and globally, and we're honoured to have him today to lead today's discussion. So over to you, John.
Well, thank you, Rhiannon, and thanks for that introduction. And I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I am today, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. As you said, Rhiannon, we're really going to focus on the role of education in implementing sustainable development. And you talked about SDG 4.7, Sustainable Development Goal Target 4.7, and that calls for all learners to acquire the knowledge and skills that are needed to promote sustainable development. Now, higher education obviously has a key role in achieving that target. And if you think about it, it covers many things. Basic sustainability, literacy, transformative mindsets, interdisciplinary skills, systems thinking and collaboration. And that's in addition to professional knowledge such as accounting for carbon and climate change law. So these are all relevant to all students in every area of a university. But I guess the question is, how should higher education institutions go about implementing what is a big agenda? And what are the priorities that they should focus on, and how can they get started? So that's the purpose of today's session. And to help us answer these questions, we've got some really special people with very special roles joining us today. Each of them have thought deeply about these questions from the perspective of the whole institution, the whole university. So let's get to know our guest today a bit better. And we've got three people, and I'd ask each of you to briefly introduce yourselves and tell us about your current role and how you got there. So I'll start with Associate Professor Martin Brueckner, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Sustainability at Murdoch University. Martin.
Thank you, John. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm hailing from Wajik country in Perth, Western Australia, also paying respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'm a sustainability scholar of about 25 years. I've been working as a social ecologist in the social sciences space, first at Edith Cowan, then at Curtin for the last 13 years at Murdoch University. And as to the question as to how I got into my current role, more like an accidental tourist in many ways. I've been an academic foot soldier for 14 years, prime representative, as Belinda would know, for Murdoch, and here being able to get the university to widen its commitment for it not to be just a business school commitment, but a university-wide commitment in 2021. And as chair of the environmental committee, pretty much been barking from the sidelines for sustainability to have more prominence in university operations and how we're going about teaching and research. Without much traction at the time, but for the last 3 years have been under new management, which underwent a process of soul searching for the institution as to what Murdoch really stands for, what defines us. And a staff survey pretty much pointed to sustainability, social justice, and Indigenous rights as to being key to the Murdoch ethos. And indeed, they are foundational principles of Murdoch. So it's something that's been part of the Murdoch DNA for many years. So it's a reorientation towards those original foundational goals. So sustainability is one of 3 strategic pillars within Murdoch, next to EDI and First Nations. And each one of those strategic pillars had a PVC role created to have carriage of the implementation of the strategic objectives within each one of those pillars. So for me, that means that I'm responsible for the operationalization of the sustainability strategy at Murdoch, which covers everything from teaching and research to governance, as well as operationally us reaching certain environmental targets, including zero waste to landfill by 2030, carbon neutrality or net zero by 2030, and being carbon positive by 2035 for operational emissions, biodiversity protection through a nature positive pledge, climate resilience in terms of infrastructure and staff and student well-being, and prudent water management, weaning ourselves from scheme water and groundwater resources as much as possible. So it's a big portfolio, and yeah, happy to chat more about it in due course as to what it entails. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. And now Associate Professor Belinda Gibbons from the University of Wollongong.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. I am joining you from beautiful Dharawal country. I'm joining you from the University of Wollongong, which I'm sure you'll kind of know where we're situated on the beautiful south coast of Australia. As you would see in the programs, I'm the current acting dean of the School of Business here at the University of Wollongong, but was previously the chair of the Prime Network chapter, the Australian and New Zealand chapter, for about 5 years. And I also sat on the UN Prime Board for about 3 years. I think for me, I entered this beautiful world of academia late in life. So I was working in tech. I was a coder. I loved my time in industry, and I was working at tech in a time when women didn't work from home, which sounds really crazy now. But and so after I had my 2 gorgeous girls, I started just casually working at university, as many of us have come from industry did, and I loved it, and I didn't leave. And for me, I entered university, or I entered specifically the business school after the global financial crisis. And that was a time when everyone said business schools were creating immoral graduates. We were extremely profit focused and unethical. And there were some pretty big collapses of Arthur Andersen and those type of examples. And so I came in at a time when there was this opportunity to really drive curriculum transformation. And the school had this focus, and this kind of enabled me to really get my hands dirty in this space, and enabled me to join the beautiful Prime community and really look at responsible and sustainable education throughout my business school and over time my institution. And I feel, I know Martin mentioned business schools, but there's probably not a business school in Australia where this isn't mainstream, and a lot of that comes from support by the Australian Business Deans Council. And so we very much have that focus, and their recent appointment of Mel Edwards as their principal fellow and their climate fellow, and the amazing work that group does there. And so I feel over time, especially now in an acting dean role of a business school, and you know, the pressures that come with that. And for me, it's been able to, you know, still see this world of leadership through the lens of, you know, responsible and sustainable education and research and service and giving back to our community. So that's just a bit about, my background and how I ended up here. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Belinda. And Corey Peterson, Chief Sustainability Officer at the University of Tasmania. Corey.
Thanks, John. Yeah, pulling in it, everyone. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Palawapakana people, Lutsworth of Tasmania, on the banks of the Timtimili-Minanya, otherwise known as the River Derwent, on the slopes of Kunanyi, Mount Wellington. So very lucky to be from the island archipelago state, which does give us some unique opportunities down here, but I'll get into some of those a little bit later. How did I get started in this? You could say, you know, way back when, but obviously gardening and stuff with my parents, but right through to when I went to work in Antarctica and originally was studying penguins, and I was on, in a way, ground zero of climate change on the planet back in the early 90s, when the temperature changes on the Antarctic Peninsula were the most extreme on the planet at that time. And we saw literally glaciers retreating, you know, by the year that had been there for tens of thousands of years, you know, and islands being uncovered and penguin colonies being impacted, and whale populations and such. So when I then was working in the Antarctic program, moved onto the ships and got to Tasmania. So my ship came in literally and figuratively to the port of Hobart, and immediately immigrated because I felt at home here, and then slowly progressed, working in various roles within the Tasmanian community, to eventually getting hired to deploy recycling bins at the University of Tasmania, because the focus at that time, there was, to Martin's point earlier, there was a group of passionate staff that wanted us to do something around the concept of sustainability, but the institution was really only ready for environmental management. How do we, lessen our negative impacts around environmental activities? And then we were able to grow that over time to the concept of environmental sustainability, to how do we enhance our positive impacts around environment. And then I've, in a way, been incredibly lucky to be supported by academics and practitioner staff, and eventual policy and management changes at this university to advance this university on what the maturity scales that you often hear in the corporate world, to the concept of holistic sustainability, and a broader understanding of what that is, not just triple bottom line, but that student experience and student engagement element that we brought into it right from the very get-go. And I'll talk about some of that in the future as well. But that gives you an idea of, I guess, where I'm coming from. It's always been a passion for me. And part of that passion is innovation and adaptation, and working with adaptive networks across the institution and enabling people's passion to make change.
Great. And fascinating that you started off in the Antarctic. My brother also worked there, I guess, a decade before you, but that really led him to a career in, well, as it happened, more ecotourism, but certainly the environment. Corey, can we focus in on education? Because that's the topic we're really looking at today. And could I ask you, what has the University of Tasmania done in relation to education for sustainability, and what have your priorities been?
Yeah, so we take our role as the only university on the island, gives us a unique role to play into not only our own students, but how do we engage with our communities? How do we engage with the other education sectors within the state? So we have a broad range of activities. So one of the first things I wanted to do was, I guess, replicate the most impactful experiences I had at undergrad and graduate schools, which was actually working real world examples within the university itself or within the school. And so we started up what is now called the Sustainability Integration Program for students, and engaging students directly in improving the sustainability outcomes for this institution. And we've been running that now for 15 years. We've had over 2,600 students. We won an Office of Learning and Teaching, if people have been around in the sector for a while, a $25,000 award for that program to allow us to expand it further. Won an International Green Gown Award for it, and that has allowed us to launch into a whole range of other activity areas, including joining up as an RCE, so a Regional Center of Expertise in Education for Sustainable Development through the UNRC program. And so we run within my team, we facilitate the EFS Tasmania, we call it for short, and that allows us to engage across everything from primary through to secondary schools and the University of the Third Age. I just kicked off their academic year around a focus on sustainability, and meeting with 70 to 85-year-olds gives you a very interesting perspective. They have lived through many things, and have really poignant examples to share of how unsustainable we have become. We've also then, as the university, obviously have longstanding strengths in environment and sociocultural teaching and research. So we've been expanding that out, mapping our curriculum to the SDGs and allowing students to look through that in the course guides and do searches on that. Our research profiles have been mapped to the SDGs as well. And then we have a number of priority areas around this and expanding it, maintaining SIPs, obviously. And we've expanded SIPs to a complementary program where students can enroll in a unit and go out and work in the Tasmanian community supported by us. Everything from the Lord Mayor's office in Hobart through to Eat Well Tasmania, which is dealing with food insecurity questions, to state government and private businesses. And they enroll to do that, and we support them, and they have mentors in the sector. So that's a pretty exciting new thing. We've been pivoting our curriculum thanks to Belinda's work many years ago. She helped ensure that UTAS Business School signed up as a prime institution. And so we've been having that for a long time. And there's been a really good pivoting there around technical skills, carbon accounting, sustainable business management, and taking it away from that immoral concept of business leaders going out with the wrong values, I guess you would say. Our engineering school is in the middle of pivoting to literally they've changed their name to the School of Climate Safe Engineering, and are pivoting their entire curriculum to the point where we won't be teaching coal mining or coal mine engineering. That was made very clear to some staff, and that they're giving a couple of years to pivot. We have a sustainability major, as many universities do. We've gone really heavily into short courses. So some of my practitioner staff, engineering and stuff, are running technically based short courses to upskill Tasmanian technical people, the utility type folks. And then we've got a new climate MOOC coming out and a few other things in that space. The really big driver that I've been pushing for to drive those specific examples are to get our graduate level attributes updated as well. And so we're renewing our entire graduate level attribute approach this year to ensure that people understand how we are pivoting to a more sustainability focused curriculum.
Wow, that's a pretty comprehensive agenda. If I could just dive into one, you talked about the sustainability integration program that involves some 2,600 students. Is that a full credit?
Now that one is predominantly paid internships that work with my
Right.
team. In the past, they were predominantly curricular based. So we were working, with different lecturers and senior lecturers around not using hypothetical examples for coursework, but rather this is a real world thing. We need a new bus stop designed for the university campus. How about we get your engineering students to do that as a project, with solar panels embedded, or a new bike hub, everything from swipe card access to, renewable energy based approach to lighting, etc. So yeah, a lot of different things, but predominantly now it's paid student interns.
Right. Okay. Well, Martin, if I can pass to you, your role at Murdoch, this current role is relatively recent, but you've been involved in this field for many years. And can you tell us how you got started in identifying the priorities for implementing education for sustainable development across the university, and what are those priorities?
Sure. Well, much of what we're doing actually comes out of the UTAS playbook, and sincere thanks actually go to Corey and his team, have been very generous with their time to get us started. And we're very much trying to emulate much of what's happening at the University of Tasmania. I mean, sustainability education at Murdoch has a proud tradition. So we didn't start off with a blank canvas. I mean, we've since inception been teaching environmental and conservation science. We have long and proud tradition in environmental engineering and named sustainability degrees across the sciences and social sciences for decades. So as such, there have always been pockets of sustainability education. Now, under the new sustainability strategy, it is our objective to ensure that we have core literacy amongst our graduates at the point of graduation, irrespective of area of study. So for us to ensure that this literacy is obtained, similar to UTAS, we're also in the process of mapping our curriculum. Our research is also mapped against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we're looking as to where the gaps are, as to whether this then can be done by way of curriculum refresh to ensure that especially accredited degrees, which are generally fairly crowded and it's very difficult to squeeze in new content into already full curricula, as to whether this can be done through curriculum refresh or whether it is co- and extracurricular activities that ensure that students will leave the institution with an understanding of First Nations priorities, EDI, and sustainability. One way of deriving the co- and extracurricular space has been the development of a volunteer certificate, which is called the Budjagina Biddy certificate, or Murdoch Metal, where students engage in a number of short training programs across EDI, First Nations, and sustainability to get a basic literacy of these three strategic themes, but to then embark on work integrated learning activities and community-based activities for which they can get volunteering credit. So this certificate at the end of their studies would accompany their university transcripts as one way of mainstreaming sustainability competencies, if you like. The levers that Corey was mentioning in terms of course learning outcomes and graduate attributes, that's exactly what we're looking at this year, because this simply is the soft rubber mallet with which to gently tap academics to think about how their courses, how their degree programs can accommodate sustainability content, as opposed to being prescriptive and having a top-down approach on how it should be done, because for each discipline, this would be a different approach. And it is the content experts within those disciplines who are best placed, if you like, to make that call as to how one might go about that. For us, it is very much a matter of driving cross-disciplinary collaboration. So that means that we're trying to break down the silos that traditionally exist within higher education, making sure that, as one example, students within environmental engineering and look particularly at renewable energy projects also get an understanding of green business finance or renewable or green energy finance projects, carbon accounting, but also soft issues coming from the social sciences, such as social license to operate, all of these things that would be part of a renewable energy transition, so that beyond the nuts and bolts technical skills that would come out of an engineering program are accompanied with the business acumen that is required, also an insight into environmental policy settings, all of which are instrumental when it comes to the success of environmental projects like green energy projects. Just as one example of how we're trying to bring together different disciplines and equip students with a more holistic understanding of the issues that they'll be facing in the workplace upon graduation.
Martin, you referred there to the soft rubber mallet. I like that description, to persuade academics, but not being prescriptive. One of the biggest challenges in education for sustainability is that we've got thousands of academics who've got their curriculum pretty much already in place. They've got a way of delivering their course, and to try to get them to change is hard. Can you talk a little bit about what the response of academics has been and what you found most effective in achieving that change amongst your teachers, your educators?
This is my top priority this year, to engage with academic colleagues on precisely that issue. Not only are academics kind of set in their way in many ways, in the way in which they go about their teaching and what they consider to be the core issues within the curriculum that they deliver, they're also incredibly time poor. So anything in the sustainability space smacks of work intensification for academics, because we ask them to take some time out to think about how sustainability can be integrated into what they do. For one, in the cognate disciplines, it's pretty much running into open doors, because this is what many staff in various disciplines have been waiting for and see that as an enormous opportunity for their disciplines. In non-cognate disciplines, it's a different ballgame altogether, where there's also the question of, you don't want us to be experts in sustainability, but it is not our bread and butter business. This is something we've had no previous exposure to. And in that sense, it became clear that it is quite an unrealistic ask for people to be experts overnight in something that they only have passing knowledge of. So we're in the process of developing professional development courses and the professional and academic staff to ensure that they can be confident and competent when it comes to questions of sustainability, whether it's in their professional or in their academic role, as one way of driving that. We've also, just last week, had our inaugural community of practice session. This is where staff interested, curious, or petrified about the prospect of having to implement sustainability into their teaching, to learn from best practice examples, to learn from their colleagues, share common problems that they're facing, and for that to be a regular forum that comes together to help collectively drive that change. It's early days. I can't say we're there. I think we're no longer crawling. I think we're slowly starting to walk, but it is a bit of a journey. So I hope that within the next 2 years, we would be at a sort of critical point where the majority of staff would have started to engage with that process.
Thanks. Belinda, so you were the former Australia-New Zealand coordinator of PRIME, the Principles for Responsible Management Education, and now you've got the leadership role at the University of Wollongong Business School. What has emerged for you as the most important educational priorities around sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thanks, John. We could probably just summarize Martin and Corey, and we've probably got it right there. Yeah, I'm always just so inspired listening to you both, and in awe of the work that takes place in your institutions. I think for me, I guess that what I've seen, I guess, you know, and the Prime Network has obviously been around for many, many years. And I think over that time, the priority was always about equipping, you know, staff and students with the knowledge and skills necessary to contribute to a more sustainable future. You know, and in listening to Corey and Martin, we're not necessarily past that, because our knowledge and skills constantly needs to be updated. You know, our climate and our earth are changing so quickly that one of the key challenges for us is just how we keep staff and students up to date, especially when it comes to curriculum. And so some of it comes back to the basics in terms of, you know, having good literacy, good sustainability literacy, whether that be, you know, climate literacy, and whether that be just a literacy in general about sustainable development, especially for the different areas that's not necessarily their focus, but it is constantly changing. And so being able to provide staff with those constant updates, and some are, you know, so yeah, staff in your carbon accounting, or they're constantly, you know, reading the literature, reading law, keeping themselves up to date. But in other areas, you know, it could be completely different. And so whilst I feel we started there with the knowledge and skills, I feel that is still there just because the pace of change. I also feel, and I think Corey mentioned the word values, and I feel that values are emerging as a really critical area for us. And so I feel, you know, in terms of those, the conversations around having staff and students have a sense of stewardship, having that community engagement, you know, for us, it's embedding Aboriginal knowledges and, you know, incorporating yarning in our classrooms. And so I feel that the way that we walk the talk is super important now, especially, you know, at this time in our current geopolitical landscape. I mean, we always know we live in a world that, you know, is in crisis, but I don't know, you know, if I've ever heard the conversations that I'm hearing go on in the hallways at the moment. And there's some pretty big conversations, and, you know, people questioning, you know, are we going to research this because we can no longer apply for a grant in this space? And I feel we're at a pivotal time. And for us as a country, we're probably maybe a little bit removed, but we're not removed. And I feel they're important conversations for us to have as staff, and they're important conversations that we have with students, and that we allow students the ability to know how to critique and to know what their thoughts are, what their values are, and to leave us knowing what their views are, what their standpoint is. I think that's really critical. So I feel that whilst the priorities are definitely around that literacy, having your basic literacy in these areas is so crucial, but then also, I guess, being able to use that literacy and understand your viewpoint on it, and being educated, you know, to have that. That's kind of how I see it. And some of the areas, you know, we might give priority to. We have an incubator and an accelerator in Wollongong, which is called iAccelerate, and their very first module of every startup company that comes to them, their very first module is on sustainable development. And every startup company has to align their startup with one or more SDGs. And so, you know, we're even kind of trying to change that entrepreneurial activity, and that for us, I guess, is a way that we engage with our community. And it's those type of activities that need to happen in the classroom. And it's the way that, whilst the curriculum's very full, enabling activities and challenges that can enable this conversation and activities to occur without necessarily that burden of having to, I'm not going to be able to fit this in my day. And so, yeah, that's kind of where my current thought is. And it's interesting listening to you, because I feel I started in academia after the global financial crisis, and I feel that was a significant period of time when curriculum was transforming. And I'm wondering, are we kind of sitting in a current era, in that time, and do we need a total transformation of, and who makes that call, who enables us? At that time it was a global call. Who is making that call for us to determine, what our next priorities are? For us, we just did our AACSB reaccreditation. That happens in business schools. It's an international accreditation. And whilst our peer review team said, yes, that's great, University of Wollongong Business School, you're reaccredited. But it's 2025 and the SDGs will be gone in 5 years. What's your next? What are you focused on next? They're kind of, that's that, but it's bigger than them necessarily. What is your next focus? And so for us, it's okay. It is the language and the literacy that we're using around that.
Just on that last point, Belinda, who's saying the SDGs will be gone in 5 years? Because pretty much all countries last year at the Summit of the Future recommitted to the SDGs and made it pretty clear that was going to be the basis for international sustainable development post 2030.
Yeah, I guess not necessarily gone in, not our focus, but the framework that we're using. Is that the current framework? Is that the framework that you're going to base? It's the language. Is that the framework from 2030 to 2045, for example? What's the framework? Because for us as institutions, the SDG is integrated now in our curriculum. It's in our subject outlines. It's in our content. If that wording changes, and in a way that's a good thing, because that enables us then to take a deeper dive and to make those changes, and to have that conversation again, and to update that. So it's not that they're gone, it's just what's the language? Are they going to change it all? And are we looking at that? Are we keeping on top of that narrative from the UN? What's happening there?
And Belinda, you did touch on the elephant in the room, which is the changed geopolitics and Trump and what they're doing. And certainly the Sustainable Development Goals are not a priority. In fact, they're a big no-no with Trump, as is DEI.
Yep.
I'd like to ask each of you, are you seeing an impact of that on students? Are students saying or coming forward and saying that we don't want to know about this sort of stuff? It's all history and we've got a past history and there's a new world now? Or are you seeing students still engaged? Starting with you, Belinda, and then I'll ask that of Martin and Corey.
I think it's for us, and if I talk to academics, it's definitely coming up in conversations in the classroom, and so it should. And if we're if we're talking about, if we're in an economics class, if we're in a marketing advertising class, if it's all our curriculum is, as I kind of mentioned before, it's integrated in, we no longer have ethics and responsibility in week 13. It's integrated throughout most weeks and conversations that we're having. And so, and for it to be so prominent in the news, and especially social news, which is what our students, feel is the ultimate information and data set that they're living their life by. And so, yeah, it's coming up in conversation, and we have to have, we have to have those conversations, and what does that look like? I mean, for us, we don't need to change. We're not changing our, our wording or our policies necessarily. It may be different for other universities.
Martin and then Corey on this.
Thank you, John. I've been out of the classroom for the last 12 months, so I can't give you a sort of finger on the pulse reading of what students think right here, right now in relation to the Trump factor. What I do know from my colleague in the DEI space is that certainly equity groups express concerns as to where things are going, but Murdoch's student body is a little bit special in the sense that we are largely attracting students somewhat left of center who are pretty fired up about environmental issues as well as social justice and Indigenous rights issues. So for them, it's pretty much where we have to double down on efforts, and in fact are pushing academics along to be, I guess, a little bit more radical in inverted commas in the way in which we go about teaching things. And for us, and certainly for me, having taught political economy of sustainable development for the last 20 odd years, it has been very much a matter of, in sort of rare sense, giving students the tool to critically evaluate as to what's going on around them. And also to give them the tools of resistance, if you like, for trends that run counter to healthy sustainability outcomes. And I think there's a yearning for answers. There's a yearning for change amongst our students and the younger population. And in that sense, they already come from high school with an expectation that something needs to change. And they look to us for at least partial answers to the questions that they have. So in that sense, as alarming geopolitical trends are, I also think there's an undercurrent of resistance towards these trends, and for students not to be deterred of in their thinking about the importance of the DEI agenda or sustainability for that matter.
Right. And Corey?
Yeah, so just reflecting on both Belinda and Martin's comments, back those up entirely. And we're not in a bubble. Yes, I'm kind of in a bubble with the students that I interact with directly as interns and things, obviously. But we've been doing sustainability surveys of our staff and students for over 10 years now, biennial surveys. I think we're on number 6, and we just did that last year. In our previous administration was, our sustainability agenda was something we pushed and pushed up to the cracks at this university to show what it could be and how broad it is. And luckily we had a major leadership change in 2018. And within that survey, prior even to that change, students were being very, very clear every time we did the survey, more and more their expectations around sustainability within the curriculum and as a focus for the institution was more and more important. After 2018, when we started to get a lot more visibility and a lot more discussion around expanding it within the curriculum, not just in pockets, that has gone up. The expectations have significantly gone up from statistically relevant samples every survey. Yes, there's probably some self-selection to somebody doing a sustainability survey, but the change in even the self-selected group has been phenomenal in their expectations. And since 2018, I can say we have reflected that in how well they think we're doing in it. As far as innovation in the curriculum and how we're embedding sustainability within the institution curriculum and our research focus areas. So the expectations are there. We're delivering on it. They see as a sector we're doing much better as delivering on it as well, not just our university. And I'll call out SDSN and ACTS for enabling a lot of that in our region of the planet, which is fabulous, keeping it up as a focus area. So I would say, yes, students very much care about this, and this has galvanized them even more to see a country that was held up, I'm a dual citizen, as an exemplar, not always perfect, and as far as leading democracy and the sustainability agenda, at least in most of the country, to see that quick and easy backsliding. Students are discussing it and discussing how do we protect what we have here in our region of the planet despite that happening. So I think it's galvanizing a lot more action. It's causing a lot of angst, and we all need to be very aware of that and how we are putting up supports around those students so they feel empowered to address those challenges and that they are things that can be overcome. Maybe I'll just leave it there.
Right. Now, just emphasize to people who are listening in that they can raise a question on the Q&A or put a comment in the chat. And there's a couple of interesting comments in the chat that have come through. One from Julie O'Brien to Belinda's point and John's comment about the SDGs. If there is commitment or agreement or progress discussions that the framework will remain post 2030, it would be great to hear a bit more about that so that we can ground conversations locally in that likelihood. So I think that is something, Tal, that we should get out to all the universities and members, what the process for the post-SDG agenda is going to be. And as I mentioned at the Summit of the Future, there was overwhelming support for continuation of the Sustainable Development Goals last September. And it was really driven by developing countries. And they don't want us to try to start again, because I think the view is that with the current geopolitics, we're not going to get some new framework. We should stick with the framework that's agreed. And what was agreed that we should be accelerating implementation. And it's really more about stick to the goals, but maybe update a few of the targets and really focus on implementation. So I think we should get that information out. There's also another comment from Zoya Zatsiva, who says it would be interesting to learn more about SDG experiential learning programs. And I think it'd be great to hear from each of you about a bit more about some of the things that you're doing on that. And starting with Corey, I thought it was really interesting that you've really had a focus on that.
Yeah, so we've run a number of different programs I've already talked about, but I'll also expand. And we've run a University Global Opportunities program that goes to three, I don't want to call them developing nations. They're just not as resource intensive users of the planet, maybe is a better way to put it. And groups of students go every January for a 4 or 5 week, whatever it is, sustainability focused activities and curriculum within those countries. I'm advocating for somewhere like Taiwan or Japan to say, okay, how is another developed country doing sustainability that we can learn from as a developed country as well? So just to give that juxtapositioning of experience, because the students then all come back together and share those experiences and the learnings from each other. So that's one opportunity. We do, of course, as certified carbon neutral university, have to understand that those students traveling are 10% of our emissions every year. And so when I present to those students as part of their experience is for them to understand not only the university's monetary and experiential investment in them, but the environment's investment in them, that there's an environmental cost to what we all do to do, and therefore, how are they going to maximize the value of that expenditure, if you will, not just monetarily, but get them thinking holistically about the choices they make. And, I say I'm not guilt tripping you. This is getting you to just think more holistically and a systems approach, which is what you're going to be doing when you're there and when you come back. And I usually get, thank you for pointing that out sort of thing, because it's a thinking that people don't currently have more broadly.
Right, thanks. And Martin, and then Belinda on the experiential programs.
I love the idea of pointing that out as to what the Earth's investment is in students' education. That's great. I share that with colleagues in international education. For us, well, we're doing a number of things. One is that we are using a living lab approach when it comes to education. Given that we've got one of the largest campuses in the country, much of it is actually bush. We also have an operational farm on campus for our veterinary students. And that offers enormous opportunities when it comes to using the campus itself as a way of providing first-hand experience of sustainability issues that we are facing. The farm in particular is one of the rare examples where we actually have a farm in an urban environment where we have sensitive wetlands next door. We've got all sorts of management issues around manure handling, groundwater contamination, drift of various sprays that are being applied in terms of herbicides and so on. And here's an opportunity for agricultural science students, vet science students in a sort of One Health approach to look as to how this can be managed in a way that soil productivity is maintained, that yields can be maintained, but at the same time, the health of sensitive ecosystems next door are also being protected and maintained. We have electrical engineering students who assist us with our energy audits. With the farm, we are now looking at the trial of a number of different cropping regimes, now bringing together what Western science, but also Indigenous knowledge systems have to offer, trying traditional Indigenous grass types, and basically pitting Western science against traditional knowledge to simply see what works best. And in that sense, give students also an understanding of what they're going to face as practitioners in that space, leaving university, where they have to think on their feet to not stick to a dogma that comes from Western science, because we also see that this is increasingly being challenged and that we're not on top of things in a number of different areas, but to look at the entire arsenal that we have as a species in terms of understanding and knowing to offer when it comes to solving those issues. So experiential learning in the sense that we have real change on campus as a result of climate change. Groundwater levels are dropping. We have less productivity on our pastures on the farm. So these are real issues that affect veterinary science and will affect veterinarians in future, or farmers or agronomists. So this is one example of how we're going about experiential learning.
Thanks. I might jump past you, Belinda, on this, because there are a couple of questions here that I want to address before we wind up. There's a really interesting question here from Andrew Wilkes, where he says, beyond mapping curriculum content for how much sustainability content is there, have any of the panelists done any work on assessing the quality of the content? And if so, how? Maybe Belinda, if I pass to you on that one.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a great question. And I'm sorry if I'm just thinking as I answer it. We have attempted to, in a sense of, obviously, as part of in order to map, you need to look at your methodology for mapping. And so I think that's important, because the methodology determines the depth that you're going to go into in your mapping. And so for us, the mapping wasn't just necessarily where is sustainable development, it's in this subject, is it in assessment, and then looking at that assessment, is it just, so for us, and it may not go to the level you need, Andrew, but we are looking at, is it just content? Is it assessment? And if it's assessment, then it's actually something the students need to deliver on. And I think that's very different. And then is it, an experiential learning activity? So we've got different categories in our mapping and then we try to look at a student's journey across the curriculum. And so because you kind of want those different touch points, to look at, if you're studying a particular course, for example, what have your touch points been? And so we've got, we've got a bit of a dashboard, but we've made up this methodology. I don't know if there's one out there that we could possibly refer to, but that's kind of, and that gives us percentages for our reporting. I guess that's what we were trying to do around that. That's just what we're using.
So is there an assessment or a method of doing this that is able to be shared? Is there an organisation that does that?
I believe so. Prime wrote a blueprint for the SDGs, and it walks you through mapping. But I don't believe, and please, if I stand corrected, please pop in the chat, colleagues, if there's a like a tool to fill in, like something really tangible that you can use, John. And I stand to be corrected on that.
We're getting close to time, but there's another very interesting point made by Trent McCarthy that it would be great to hear the panel's thoughts on universities and TAFEs collaborating to lead SDG projects with academic and vocational outcomes. Does anyone have any comment on that?
I might just jump in there. Trent, that's actually critical, and it goes to a systemic conversation that we need to have about our education system more broadly. How are we actually doing this from creche through to university of third age, right through to vocational? How are we as universities participating in the conversation? Because I don't think we always should be the ones leading it per se, because that usually comes across as the big player in the room telling others how it's going. But we need to somehow broker a way to have those conversations systemically for the sectors in this country. And if we need to do it by state first, maybe we need to encourage that. I know we have tried. TAFE has, come and gone, with different focus areas. They've been restructured and whatever. So it is hard. Is there a state that has a very strong, or even New Zealand, in the polytechnics that are very stable, that could get involved in that conversation? Would be very useful for them to start it.
Well, I do believe this is something that we should work on through SDSN and ACTS. Certainly, Skills Australia has identified the need for much closer integration between higher education and vocational education in these major sustainability areas. I mean, the classic is electric vehicles and the transition away from traditional fuel combustion vehicles. But there are so many others where the skills are the combination of skills that you get through TAFE and through higher education, and yet we don't do a lot of that, it seems to me. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I think Tal and Rhiannon, there's some great ideas in the chat and then that we want to record and take forward, but Rhiannon's going to just close us off for today. Rhiannon.
Thank you so much, John, and to all of our speakers today. We are incredibly grateful for the time and thought you've put into sharing your experiences and perspectives. It's certainly been an insightful conversation and open to the forum series. I knew it would go quickly and we wouldn't get to touch on lots of the different conversation points. So yes, Tal and I are taking note of everything that's come up, and I'm pleased to see a few of the things that have popped up as discussion points are things that we have already chatted about, and we just weren't sure where to fit in on the 4 sessions that we have in this forum. So we will continue those conversations. Speaking of what's coming up over the next 2 weeks, we have 3 more sessions, each one focusing on a different piece of the puzzle when it comes to putting education for the SDGs into practice. So this Thursday, the 27th of March, we'll explore the role of higher education and accelerating our region's transition to a sustainable economy and society. So again, picking up on that last conversation piece around the role of vocational and higher education, and really touching on the role that HE has to play in this, because so much of the focus in what is perceived those traditional areas does go into the vocational space. So a really great conversation on Thursday. Next Tuesday, the 1st of April, we'll be focusing on the practical approaches to integrating education for the SDGs into higher education degrees. So we'll be looking at examples of course level innovation, cross-faculty collaborations, and approaches to assessment and pedagogy. So again, picking up on a few more of those points from today's discussion. And the final session, Thursday, the 3rd of April, we will look at educators. So looking at how we can empower and support staff to embed education for the SDGs into their teaching practice. So you'll hear about professional development, peer learning, and tools and frameworks that can help make this work stick. So you can register for all of these sessions via the forum website, and I believe Tal's popped that into the chat if you're not already on top of that. And just a final reminder that this does come under the banner of the Accelerating SDG Practice Initiative that's been a joint initiative for ACS and SDSN for many years. And a big thank you to Tal, who's behind the scenes today, for all the work that she does to bring this forum together. I want to give a shout out to her before we sign off for today. So thanks again, everyone, to our speakers, to John, for being a part of today's session. I hope to see you all on Thursday.